Let's continue with our discussion of Abundance by Ezra Klein and Derek Thompson. This is the sixth part of our interpretation. The book concludes with the idea that the key technologies for building an abundant society are already available. The main challenge now is deployment, and that requires government action. There's a popular saying, the US is good at going from 0 to 1, while China excels at going from 1 to n. It's true that inventing a technology is one thing, and rolling it out at scale is another. But the story isn't that simple. Let's start with an example that Chinese audiences are particularly fond of. Solar photovoltaics. The world's first solar panel was invented in 1954 by 3 researchers at Bell Labs in the US. Sunlight hitting a silicon semiconductor chip could be converted into electricity. The New York Times celebrated this moment, declaring that humanity had entered a new era. Unlimited solar power would serve civilization. But early solar power was completely impractical. If you had tried to use that technology to power and heat your home, it would have cost $1 million a day. Still, it had its uses in extreme environments. Like space. Satellites had previously been powered by onboard batteries that lasted no more than 4 months. With solar panels, their lifespan increased to 6 years. So, starting in 1958, the US government invested in space-based solar power, and by 1969 had poured tens of millions of dollars into it. Then came the 1973 oil crisis. The government began to seriously consider alternative energy, placing bigger bets on solar. Thousands of scientists, engineers, and entrepreneurs entered the field. In a decade, solar panel efficiency tripled, and costs fell to 1/5 of the original. But in 1980, Ronald Reagan came to power. Reagan wasn't unintelligent, but his conservative ideology, like Trump's, was highly resistant to government interference in markets and dismissive of clean energy. His energy secretary was a dentist by training and didn't understand technology. The result? Massive damage to the US solar industry. Federal funding was withdrawn, and many solar research facilities were simply dismantled. Reagan also got lucky. Saudi Arabia began supplying cheap oil, solving the energy crisis. And that was essentially the end of the solar story in America. In the 1990s, Germany picked up the baton. Its government subsidized both solar consumers and producers. It was Germany that brought solar into the market mainstream. But the country that truly scaled and strengthened the solar industry was China. Starting in the 2010s, the Chinese government offered generous support to solar panel manufacturers. Subsidies, low-interest loans, and even free land. Chinese companies stepped up, improved their technologies, built specialized machinery, and created automated production lines. One company reportedly imported a special saw from Switzerland that could slice silicon wafers extremely thin, cutting manufacturing costs further. In just 15 years, China slashed solar panel costs by 90%. By 2020, China controlled 70% of global solar panel production capacity. Then the US finally responded and began pushing solar again. So, clearly, this story is far more complex than simply saying, America goes from 0 to 1, China from 1 to n. The biggest lesson here is that many of the things we consider great inventions today looked useless when they first appeared, and may remain that way for a long time. Take penicillin, for example. Penicillin is commonly said to have been invented in 1928 by Scottish scientist Alexander Fleming. But Fleming merely noticed something in a petri dish that seemed to kill bacteria. All his work was done in the lab. Whether it actually worked in animals wasn't proven until 1939, when 2 scientists in the UK, Howard Florey and Ernst Boris Chain, conducted animal trials. They then attempted human trials but had limited resources and could only test 5 patients. The results weren't good. 2 patients died. In hindsight, the failures were likely due to contamination or insufficient dosage. Not because penicillin itself didn't work. But on the ground, would you have dared to keep betting on penicillin? Penicillin only truly took off when the US stepped in. As we mentioned earlier, President Roosevelt established the Office of Scientific Research and Development, OSRD, based on Vannevar Bush's recommendations. This department decided to back penicillin in a big way. With national-level resources, the approach changed completely. Americans discovered that penicillin production could be boosted tenfold using corn steep liquor. The military tested new, high-yield strains of mold. Clinical trials confirmed efficacy. The government then invested millions of dollars to build factories. The result? Mass production slashed costs by 95%. By 1945, penicillin was affordable to everyone in the U.S. It made surgery safer, reduced childbirth infections, and dramatically lowered battlefield mortality, saving countless lives. The point is, going from 0 to 1 isn't enough. To truly change the world, a technology must climb 3 rungs: tinkering, embodiment, and scaling. This requires massive investment, infrastructure, and collective effort. Scaling, in particular, isn't just a matter of multiplying output. It involves something known as Wright's law. First observed by American aeronautical engineer Theodore Wright, it states that every time aircraft production doubles, unit costs fall by about a third. Why? Because people learn as they build. Processes are optimized, and efficiency improves. This applies to penicillin, computer chips, Ford's assembly line cars, and China's solar industry. Technology isn't born fully formed. It emerges through countless iterations, experiments, optimizations, collaborations, judgments, risks, failures, and improvements. And especially during the immature and profitable stages, it needs government support. Earlier, we said the U.S. has grown more conservative about 0 to 1. But now we should emphasize, going from 1 to N also needs government. New technologies rarely look profitable at first. In a market economy, companies must not only make money, they must make it quickly. Few can afford to invest heavily today in the hope of a return a decade later. That kind of risk is best taken by governments. Not just because they have money, but because they can pick winners. Beyond direct subsidies, loans, or land, what economists call push funding, the U.S. has also pioneered pull funding, a model that resembles prize incentives. If a company develops a certain technology, the government promises to buy it, offering a guaranteed large order. This is known as an Advanced Market Commitment, AMC. The U.S. used AMCs to develop COVID-19 vaccines. The government funded multiple technologies in parallel, then promised to purchase whichever proved effective, at scale. For the government, this was a way to embrace uncertainty while ensuring success. For private firms, AMCs reduced market risk, encouraging bold investments. Today, AMCs are ideal for risky, expensive early-stage technologies, like seawater desalination, carbon capture, or low-carbon cement. The government helps get things off the ground, then hands them over to the market once they're commercially viable. Isn't this exactly what governments should be doing? As Keynes said, the important thing for government is not to do the things which individuals are doing already, and to do them a little better or a little worse, but to do those things which at present are not done at all. Yet today, amid numerous obstacles, the U.S. government is losing that ability. So, does this mean the American system is failing? Not necessarily. As I've said before, America's strength doesn't lie in what its government does, but in what it doesn't do. The U.S. still respects the market, and the market is its zero-order principle. As long as you rely on markets, no matter how much you mess up, you won't ruin everything. But the market isn't omnipotent. It often fails in areas like technological innovation, where first-order corrections are needed. Relying solely on markets to drive invention, especially basic research, is far too slow. When a government bets on a promising direction, it's perfectly reasonable to give it a push. What America needs now is a second-order correction of its first-order corrections, but without abandoning the zero-order principle. Throughout our interpretation of this book, we've discussed how procedural justice can lead to rigidity. But remember, procedural justice is fundamentally a good thing. Because governments respect process. With hearings, bidding, budgets, audits, they can avoid abuse, corruption, and arbitrary action. A government that upholds procedural justice may struggle to get good things done, but at least it won't trample citizens' rights or destroy the environment. Of course, rules require flexibility. Principles need pragmatism. The real problem today is that intense partisanship in the U.S. has weakened the government's power and stripped away its flexibility. Yet Klein and Thompson remind us that the U.S. government excels at mobilizing national resources during times of crisis. In a democracy, once consensus is reached, society can mobilize quickly. Penicillin succeeded because war forced urgent government R&D. Vaccine development normally takes 10 years. During COVID, it took just 10 months. Looking further back, the financial turmoil of 1907 gave rise to the Federal Reserve. The Great Depression birthed the New Deal. World War II produced the OSRD. The Cold War with the USSR pushed the US to create DARPA. Good leaders can use crises to push through structural reforms. In fact, Biden has already made some moves. The CHIPS and Science Act to boost domestic manufacturing. Green energy subsidies. The Infrastructure Act to build EV charging networks. But these policies have met various roadblocks and ultimately failed to achieve true emergency measures. Now, with Trump making a comeback, where will the US head next? Klein and Thompson reference an intriguing theory from American historian Gary Gerstle. Political order. This theory holds that national policy isn't shaped by any one politician's whim but by the intersection of geopolitical realities and the values held by ordinary citizens. For example, over the past century, the U.S. has gone through three major political orders. The first was the New Deal Order, 1930s-1970s. The Great Depression brought unity, and the Cold War against the USSR gave the government reason to prove its system was superior and more humane. The consensus among citizens was, we need a strong state. The second was the Market Freedom Order, 1970s-2010s. The shift had two causes. The Soviet model was clearly inferior. No need to prove anything anymore. And government failures in Vietnam and stagflation shattered public trust. The new consensus was, deregulate, cut taxes, markets over everything, and strong individualism. Can't we just do things ourselves? Why should government interfere? But that consensus began to break down after the 2008 financial crisis. People questioned whether markets really delivered fairness. Who got the benefits of globalization? Housing and tuition costs soared. The lower classes, like Trump's MAGA base, felt excluded from prosperity. That's the third transformation. America has entered a transition phase where no new consensus has yet emerged. Klein and Thompson see two paths forward for the U.S. One is the path of abundant politics. Focus on growing the pie, ensuring more people can afford to live, buy, and use. Encourage science, reduce red tape, break down industry barriers, unleash market potential. Embrace more open and free policies. The other is the path of scarcity politics. A belief that the pie is fixed, or even shrinking, so it must be protected. This path leans toward protectionism, anti-immigration, anti-globalization, scapegoating, and preserving existing privileges. As we've discussed on our channel before, these represent two fundamentally opposing worldviews. We naturally support the politics of abundance, while billionaire Donald Trump represents the politics of scarcity. Finally, I want to say that Trump has actually presented China with an opportunity to reopen and embrace openness again. I once had a conversation with a history professor who made an interesting observation. When countries choose their development path, they often do so deliberately in contrast to their rivals. For example, China has long benchmarked itself against the US, which led to an intentional differentiation. If the US stands for freedom, then China emphasizes stability. If the US prioritizes environmentalism, then China focuses on development. If the US talks about human rights, China stresses order. This explains why Vietnam has pushed for more reforms than China in recent years. Vietnam benchmarks against China, not the US. Later, I read The Dawn of Everything, A New History of Humanity, and discovered that this phenomenon predates even the agricultural era. Some anthropologists describe culture as a structure of refusal. Our culture must be different from yours. If you do things one way, we must do them another. There's even a theory called seismogenesis, which argues that two neighboring and similar groups often diverge on purpose, simply to differentiate themselves. Maybe your model works just fine, but we're not going to copy it. We insist on doing it our own way. At first glance, this might sound childish. How can matters of national importance be reduced to something so petty? But history shows us that this is a deeply rooted psychological mechanism. In the past, when the US loudly championed liberalism, China would constantly critique it. But now, with Trump leading America into a period of isolation and retrenchment, China has a unique opportunity to form a new collective consensus. We want to be different from the United States, and that means choosing a path of openness. Think about recent headlines. Don't you see some signs already? No matter what, technological progress and social transformation have opened up a major strategic window. Whether we move toward abundance or scarcity, that choice lies right before us. That's it for today's content. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. If you feel there is value in this, please like, subscribe to this channel, and leave your thoughts or suggestions in the comments section. Let's grow together and read more good books.